Okay, hi sa mga estudyante ko. Good morning. And I will just discuss to you some of the good characteristics and functions of practical research too. Para mas maging malinaw sa inyo kung paano ba dapat kinokonduct ang research, di ba? It is very important for us to know the essence of practical research too in our everyday life. And sometimes we do not appreciate these kinds of subjects kasi we do not think that we are involved in this process. The reason why it's because kaya siya masyadong nanineglect, isa siya sa mga pinakamahirap na subject sa senior high school, and yet, hindi siya nabibigyan ng importansya or hindi siya nakikita ng estudyante na important dahil uh, ano nga ba kung matalino ka sa research, yayaman ka ba? Or magkakaroon ka ba ng secure na job? Kasi most of the time, research are being neglected in the process. But if you would know, smart companies or countries that have very great economy like Singapore, China, United States, and other countries, makikita mo na kaya sila mayaman, it's because they put importance on practical research. They always research on how to solve problems. 'Di ba? And that is something that we here in the Philippines, that kind of curiosity wherein we would like to solve problems through the use of scientific methods. Kung alam lang ng mga companies and alam hindi lang basta wawaldas ka ng pera sa lahat ng mga projects or proyekto, mas lalo sana tayong makakatipid, and at the same time, mas lalo nating magbibigyan ng optimal results yung ating mga efforts. Ang daming failed projects sa Pilipinas, both from companies and governments, kasi kulang sa research o hindi na popondahan ang ating science and technology. So parang lagi tayo nagkakaroon ng brain drain dito sa Philippines because we do not really give importance to smart people. Usually lahat ng mga matatalinong tao mula sa Pilipinas, nagmamigrate sila sa ibang bansa, and yung ibang bansa yung mas yumayaman in the process, 'di ba? So yun yung pinaka parang nakakalungkot na realidad dito sa ating bansa. So I just hope that if you would like to learn more about practical research, just continue it kasi it's very, very important. So now let's start. What are the functions and characteristics of a good practical research or quantitative research? So in dealing with that, we are aiming to describe characteristics of quantitative research in this PowerPoint presentation. So, as an activity, I just would like to guide you in terms of explaining these images and how they are connected with quantitative research, okay? So, as you will see in this first illustration, you will notice that there are people pulled in color blue, red, yellow, and green. And they are all in the same platform, circular platform. Now, if you would notice, also, there are people on these platform wherein they're parang ready or like they're athletes, ano. So what does this convey? This image conveys that in terms of research, you are not only trying to measure numbers of people, but probably among athletes, you may use quantitative research in order to measure their athletic performances, 'di ba? Or their skills or ability. So, practical research too may be useful in terms of companies such as, for example, entertainment industry. Paano ba nagagamit ang practical research? Kung matalino lang talaga yung mga network sa Pilipinas, they can make use of survey kung sino sa tingin nila, kunyari, meron silang pine-prep or gino-groom na artista in order for them to be part of their Magic Artist Center, pwede sila mag-conduct ng survey kung ano yung mas nag-a-appeal na itsura sa taong bayan, or di kaya naman kung sino sa kanila from among these people nagagalingan sila sa mga aspiring artists na to, or anong klaseng story ang parang nagre-reflect sa buhay ng mga tao ngayon which they can look up to. So in that process, entertainment industry can make use of practical research, or sports industry can make use of practical research by seeing how people engage or impress upon these aspiring artists that they're actually handling. So in the process, they will have a sound um, they will have a sound decision in terms of kung sino nga ba yung sa tingin nilang pwede nilang gawing uh, artista, di ba? So that's just one practical example, an unusual one that we can use practical research in terms of a peculiar industry, di ba? So another one is in terms of measurement. So what would be beneficial for people in terms of the weight of let's say value of these two competing products. So in this example, technically, what is being measured is a big fish versus a group of small fishes, diba? Now, if you would, as a person, if you would think about this in a practical level, of course, depende yan sa pangangailangan mo. So kung marami kang maliliit na tao na, for example, mga anak or maliliit na bata na papakainin, of course, what would be ideal is for you to distribute small fishes, di ba? Instead of giving it a large one. But uh, sa sa case naman ng kailangan mo ng ihanda yung malaking isda if magkakaroon ng pulutan. So ano yung allegory na yun in terms of research? You are not only simply looking at the values of things when in terms of comparison, like for example, ano yung pinaka-effective, ano yung pinaka-maganda, ano yung pinaka-appealing, but most importantly, when you're deciding upon two competing, for example, competing brands or competing things or competing phenomena, you're going to look at the appropriateness of the said product. Kasi kung sa tingin mo as a researcher or kung sa ginagamit mo lang na perspective is as a person who's handling the business, di ba, magiging narrow-minded ka. Bakit? Kasi mabubulag ka doon sa tinatawag nating bias. Ano? So titingnan mo kasi ang gusto mo, marami yung pieces. So titingin ka doon sa mas maraming hati-hati ang pieces. 'Di ba? So kunyari pipiliin mo yung mga small fishes. So in case na for example when you're producing shampoo, 'di ba? Ang iniisip mo mas makakatipid tayo kung ang ibebenta na lang natin per bote, hindi tayo per sachet. Eh kung hindi siya appropriate sa target market mo which is the Philippines na tinitingi ang behavior, 'di ba? Mas gusto nilang tinitingi sila bumili, hindi mo makukuha or hindi ka makakabenta ng mas mabilis doon sa market na yun kasi hindi mo pa naiintindihan yung nature ng behavior ng taong binibentahan mo. So it is very important that when you're measuring two things, you don't only look at it on kung ano yung mas mabigat, kung ano yung mas maganda, you will also think of what is actually appropriate in the subject matter. Next, when you're dealing with quantitative research, you're also thinking about the opinions of other people, 'di ba? And not only just opinions of them, but you're also grouping their own opinions based on statistical data. So, as we would think before, qualitative research is more on the interviews. Tinitingnan mo yung emotions, feelings ng mga tao in terms of a particular product, but it's just concentrated on small number of samples. So when you're dealing with quantitative data and kukuha ka ng opinion, you will have to make sure that you will compute the aggregate or the sum or total of the opinion per category. So for example, let's say gagawin mong basic yung results, maraming nagsasabi na maganda, appealing sa mata, kaaya-aya, okay. So, kailangan i-group mo siya in terms of visual appeal. Now, kunyari, let's say naman, may mga comments na mabango siya, naaalala niya yung amoy ng kanyang unan, dati nung ginagamit niyang bata pa siya. So, those kinds of smell, you are going to talk about the olfactory appeal, di ba? So, in terms of dealing with quantitative research, yung mga qualitative opinions na yon, kailangan mo siyang ipo-pull and isiset mo yung mga tinatawag nating pecuniary estimation kung ilan yung mga opinion na yon at doon mo siya titimbangin kung gaano karami yung nagsasabi ng ganitong particular situation. Kasi when pagka naman qualitative research, you're looking at it on a deeper level. Pero, konti lang ang samples. Dito sa quantitative research, tumitingin ka sa dami ng opinion or based sa dami ng nagsasabi, but you're not really looking at it on a much deeper level, di ba? So you're only interested in the population's statement, not really on an individual statement. So when you're also dealing with quantitative research, you're also dealing with data. So as we all know, how much important data is. Yumayaman ng Facebook, ang Twitter, ang Instagram because of the fact na nagko-collect sila ng data and they give it to companies for them to be able to advertise. Ano? Paano yon? So lahat ng activities mo sa Facebook are actually being tracked down by an artificial intelligence. So, kung ano yung unang site na pinupuntahan mo, ano yung page na kiniklik mo, ano yung mga words na sinesearch mo, lahat yan, tinatrack yan ng Facebook. So, through the means of monitoring your behavior and collecting it as a data, they can actually see or they can predict ano yung mga susunod mong products na pupuntahan or bibilhin or probably gusto mong makita. So, through that, binibigay ng ginagamit ng Facebook yung services nila for advertisement. So nakikipag-communicate sila sa companies na okay, so kung si Unilever, meron siyang product na Dove, 'di ba? So ibibigay niya yung services niya kay Dove at sasabihin niya, huwag ka na mag-alala regarding sa advertisement mo because we can deliver the information to the right people who can be converted from just a mere audience to actually an engaging audience member. Pag sinabing engaging audience member, may possibility na ma-convert siya from an audience to a customer. So quantitative research also deals with surveys. So we have these options like yes, no, maybe. And then yung yes, no, maybe na yun are being computed. Diba? So tinitingnan mo dyan kung ilan ang nagsabi ng yes, ilan ang nagsabi ng no, at ilan ang nagsabi ng maybe. And quantitative research also gives you a perspective of what we call one-tailed hypothesis and two-tailed hypothesis. Ano? When you say one-tailed hypothesis, pag tiningnan niyo siya sa graph, you're only looking at it on a two sets of variable wherein you're already trying to predict a certain behavior of the dependent variable. So for example, let's say sabi dito sa statement, a happy dog will eat more. Ibig sabihin, you're looking at the correlation between happiness of the dog and his or her tendency to eat more of the food of what he's currently eating. So yung happiness, tinitingnan mo na or kino-correlate mo na the more na happy siya, the more na mas marami siyang kinakain. When you're talking about two-tailed hypothesis, you're not trying to predict already that happiness is an indication that a dog will eat. Diba? So a two-tailed hypothesis, you're pertaining to a situation wherein maapektuhan yung isang certain behavior. So for example, your theory is that mood affects the appetite of dogs. So you're not really simply looking at it on the perspective of happiness, but you're also trying to look at it on the perspective, on the view or on the variable of sadness, probably depression, anxiety ng dogs that can actually affect the appetite of the dog. So there's a lot of possibility, diba? And what you can only generalize in this situation is that whether happy siya or sad, or depressed or anxious, the fact that he or she is having a mood instability, it actually affects his or her way of eating. And lastly, when we're dealing with quantitative research, we can also talk about longevity of a human life. So if you would track it before, bago pa yung industrial revolution, life expectancy of a person only lasts for 60 years old, di ba? Pero nung modernity has come to expand or extend, ang longevity ng tao ay tumatagal ng 82 to 90 years old, di ba? Yun yung parang average years of longevity ng isang tao. And also, when we're dealing with quantitative research, we're talking about graphs, pie charts, histograms, line graphs, etc. So we're also dealing with these kinds of graphical visualizations in order to interpret our data. So I would like you to ponder these following experiences in research. Number one, what are the things or experiences you like to learn in doing research? And number two, what are the challenges and the difficulties that you face in doing research. As I told you, my students, I'm not requiring that the research topics that you're going to deal with are very difficult in nature. All you have to do is to research on a topic that will most favor your personality, your preference, and at the same time your capability of finishing the said research. Now, when we're dealing with quantitative research, we're also talking about instruction, community service, and production. So these are the four functions of the school, di ba? So as part of an academia, we are required actually as teachers to make researches, ano? But more than that, we also have to deal with our instruction, yun nga yung tinatawag natin curriculum na binibigay ng Department of Education, community service like being engaged with our barangays, and also producing knowledge and producing graduates that will be able to apply the said knowledge and principles that we taught in the school. The thrusts of the 21st century research are the following. So number one, health and welfare, di ba? When we're dealing with quantitative research, we would like to improve our health. So nauuso nga ngayon ang mga research regarding sa mental health, di ba? Among senior high school because that is the one of the most popular topics for them to talk dahil yun yung very prominent idea or very prominent topic to talk about right now because of pandemic. And also, those people who are experiencing COVID-19, so we can actually research on that. Regarding food production and sustainability, so when pandemic hit, mas lalo na din naging important itong food production and sustainability. Bakit? Kasi knowing na ang pinanggagalingan ng mga most of the time gulay natin or mga baboy ay galing ng Baguio, Bulacan, or Nueva Ecija, since nagkaroon ng pandemic or lockdown, the distribution of food has been ceased or has been cut, 'di ba, sa mga region. So paano na, kunyari sa situation natin sa Manila, paano siya mas isustain knowing na hindi makapass through yung mga uh, pagkain na dapat na ibebenta ngayon sa market, 'di ba? We're also talking about social awareness in terms of research. Social awareness meaning mas naging in tune ka sa nangyayari sa paligid mo. Technology and development. So when we're dealing with practical research, we're also talking about paano natin mas i-improve yung ating pamumuhay through technology and development. Culture and arts and conservation of environment and safety. So practical research sometimes can be used in order to enhance our culture, but sometimes it is disregarded because culture and arts are have a world of its own, diba? Sometimes researchers cannot really explain the phenomenon of culture. They only explain it in terms of the after effects, but they cannot really predict it. For me, culture and arts being a part of society or sociology is an organism on its own that cannot simply be predicted by people. So for example, let's say because kunyari sa atin sa bilang nag nabubuhay tayo dito sa city, we cannot predict the culture of how it will develop sa mga parts na hindi natin na-witness katulad ng mga Aita or Igorot. How are they currently coping with COVID-19, diba? Knowing that they are indigenous people. So, how they adapt or how they cope as indigenous people, we cannot predict, but we can just help them, diba? And of course, conservation of an environment or safety, we need research in order to find ways that we will ensure na hindi natin maapektuhan masyado ang ating environment. Again, quantitative research comes from the French word recherche, which means to travel or to survey. Webster defines research it as a systematic, patient study and investigation in some fields of knowledge undertaken to discover and to establish facts and principles. So, Calderon and Gonzalez has stipulated that research may be defined as a purposive. Pag sinabing purposive, may purpose. Systematic, sumusunod sa rules, 'di ba? Sumusunod ka sa pagkakasunod-sunod ng scientific process in terms of gathering, analyzing, classifying, organizing, presenting, and interpreting data. Okay? For the solution of a problem, for prediction, invention, and discovery of truth or expansion and verification of existing knowledge, all for the preservation of human life. So without research, hindi magi-improve ang ating buhay. Sometimes we neglect or we don't really give prioritize to social scientists or scientists themselves because we think na what is important is just to produce goods. But actually, we wouldn't be able to produce goods if it weren't for the scientists themselves, di ba? Quantitative means presenting data through numerical parameters and statistical values. So we've already discussed this. Now, when we're dealing with research, we're talking about an investigation to identify a phenomenon. And there are two underlying general principles that we have to look for in terms of research: accuracy and criticalness. So pag sinabing accuracy, we would want to deal with data that are accurate in nature. Kailangan precise. Hindi pwedeng parang, for example, ang sinabi sa data is 59 ang 59 ang ni-research mo. So, pwede mo ba siyang i-round up kung hindi naman talaga 60? Hindi pwede, di ba? So, dapat kung ano yung sakto na number of samples na ginawa mong samples, you should state it as it is. It's just 59. In terms of criticalness, you're talking about the critical thinking that is being applied in the research. Paano po ba yon? Hindi ka lang simple nag-look at that data and sasabihin mo, okay, pinakamataas sa survey or leading sa election poll is si Senator Manny Pacquiao o di kaya si Vice President Leni Robredo. But you're going to look at it, like interpret the data. Why do you think or why do people think na these presidentiables are actually popular in the Philippines? Bakit? So, i-explain mo yung phenomena behind their own popularity. And of course, that is already coming from data. So generally, the purpose of research pressed in a capsule as number one to discover is to find the truth about the subject which was not yet part of the stream of knowledge. And number two, to verify is to find whether what was found to be true 50 years ago is still true today. So again, we have two purposes. Number one, to discover para malaman natin kung ano yung hindi pa natin alam. And number two, to verify if the confirmed data or the confirmed knowledge that we had still remains true today. Diba? So before, kunyari, let's say, we thought or countries thought, actually sa Pilipinas, meron naman talagang existing knowledge ang mga Filipino in terms of homosexuality. It's actually accepted even way before we were conquered by the Spaniards. May tinatawag na mga babaylan na kung saan, hindi talaga sila babae, they're actually males, but they are dressed in females. So, kung titingnan before, ang akala sa Western culture or Western society is that homosexuality is a disease. Pero, after being confirmed, after much of data being gathered, di ba, you will see na hindi naman pala siya disease. It's actually a part of human sexuality, being homosexual or heterosexual, di ba? So, it's just normal. So, hindi ko alam bakit may iba pang tao that they cannot really see kasi they're always using the Bible as their cornerstone of knowledge when in fact, it's not really something to be interpreted literally. Di ba? So, research functions as a discovery for new niya, yung mga maling perceptions natin, pan yung topic. It also gathers information on subjects, phenomena with little knowledge or information. It expands or verifies existing knowledge, and it finds answer to questions or queries by means of scientific studies. It develops and evaluates concepts, practices, and theories. Also develops and evaluates methods. So, hindi lang natin tinetest or pinapractice yung mga theories na nakukuha natin, but also, we also look at the accuracy of the method that we employed. Kasi, for example, in the conduct of our quantitative research, di ba, sa process mo, hindi ka sumunod doon sa tinatawag nating parang system of rules in terms of gathering data, may part na may impluwensyahan yung result mo. So, kunyari, ang sinabi sa iyo is dapat at that time, i-gather mo yung research, nasa school yung mga estudyante and not really at home, diba? In order for them to evaluate the way they feel inside their classrooms, dapat sundin mo yon because these are some of the important factors in which you actually try to consider. Or di kaya, let's say you're talking about or you're researching about annulled couples, di ba? So when we're dealing with annulled couples, we have to make sure kung ano bang pakiramdam nila. Kasi baka mamaya, ang iniisip mo or tinitingnan mong research dito is, how do annulled couples which happily separated deal with their own lives. So, paano sila masasabing they happily separated and ang ini-interview mo pala is kakaanal lang naman pala. So, hindi natin yon dapat tinitake into consideration mo yung nature and circumstances ng pag-gather mo ng data. Research obtained knowledge can be utilized for practical purposes. Okay? Again, when you conduct research, it has to be applied in real life kasi sayang lang yung oras and pera mo kung hindi mo naman din naman pala siya magagawa. Research provides hard facts which serve as basis for planning, decision-making, monitoring, and evaluation, and to satisfy the researcher's curiosity by searching again exhaustively new facts either for personal and satisfaction or society's gain. So, what are the characteristics of a good research? It must be systematic, controlled. Pag sinabing controlled, you consider the fact that there are external factors that can affect the research. So, ang ginagawa, minimize mo yung external factors na makaka-apekto dun sa research mo. Empirical, when you say empirical, it has to be sensible, di ba? Analytical, objective, unbiased, and logical, and it employs hypotheses. It employs qualitative or statistical methods. It must be an original work. Pag sinabing original work, this is a, what do you call that, a very gray area, no? Kasi sa totoo lang, lahat naman talaga ng studies is derivative. But we only make it original when we employ our own theory or when we employ our own practices for the said research. So we have different approaches in terms of testing data, diba? It must be done by an expert. Okay, so kaya nga sinasabi ko sa mga estudyante ko, when it comes to a topic that you think you cannot really research on because you do not have any expertise on that, wag nang gagawin kasi ang mas maganda dito, mas kailangan yung i-research mo, alam mo kaya mo siyang panindigan. So you must be somehow like an expert. For example, as I told you, there's no problem in terms of making use of your practical research and studying of the effects of Mobile Legends. Wala yung problema. Kasi kung doon ka naman talaga expert and sanay ka and naka-experience ka naman talaga ng mobile gaming addiction, di ba? So, you can use your experience as an anchor to start your own research. It must be a patient and unhurried activity. It requires an effort-making capacity and it requires courage and intelligence. So, ito siya. Researcher. So one of the things that I would like to point out here is that it must be economical. Bakit? Because when you're talking about research and sobrang mahal ng research, hindi mo naman pala kaya siyang gastusan, mas maganda kung papalitan mo na lang yung topic mo or wag man lang itutuloy yung research mo. So when we're dealing with Philippine research trends, we have short-term research and long-term research. Pag sinabing short-term, we're only dealing with parang spontaneous projects. However, when we're talking about long-term research, kaya mo siya long-term ginagawa, it's because you know that kailangan long-term yung impact ng sinasabi mong research. And we must also adhere with the following ethical principles. So, sabi nga ni Einstein, everything that can be counted does not necessarily count. Everything that counts cannot necessarily be counted. So, bakit ganyan ang sinabi ni Einstein? Sometimes, when we're dealing with quantitative research, there must always be a margin of doubt. Na after all, what we found in our research must not be interpreted as an absolute truth, but only as one way of thinking about things. Diba? So, hindi naman sa lahat ng pagkakataon, our research or the way we are researching, we're looking at the absolute verified data na makakatulong sa atin. Sometimes we're just looking for how we can perceive things much better than we used to. And that's how we improve our lives kasi we always deal with trial and error, di ba? So for those students who have listened to this lecture, I hope that you've learned a lot and Susunod naman is creative writing.